Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well. We're in the laws of Rechilus. I'm going to try to talk over the people cutting the lawn across the street. Hopefully, it won't get picked up on the tape, but in Manalapan, somebody is always cutting the lawn somewhere. Okay, so we are on the laws of Rechilus, Klal Vav, which is chapter 6, and Halacha Aleph, Halacha number 1. Aser lekabel rechilus afilo im hamasaper siper es hadaver bepirsum. It is forbidden to accept rechilus, even if it is spoken in public. Right? We shouldn't think that if someone says rechilus, that just because they said it in front of a lot of people means it's true. Don't think that because they had the confidence to say it publicly that it's true. So if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, you know what Tom said about you? He said that you're a thief and a bad guy. So that is rechilus." And the fact that he said that about Tom in front of many people makes no difference. It's still forbidden. And you're not allowed to believe that it's true. Just because this person said it in front of a lot of people doesn't make it true. You're not allowed to believe it. So like we mentioned before, if someone tells you Rechilus, you're not allowed to believe it in your heart. However, you are allowed to take necessary precautions, what's called being choshesh for it, and you're allowed to protect yourself from a possible damage which could occur to you. So even if someone comes and says, Tom was talking about cheating you in the future, he was saying that you're a bad guy and a thief, you're not allowed to believe that Tom actually said it. However, you're allowed to be cautious when being around Tom and to protect yourself. But the fact that he said it in front of many people does not make it true, and you're not allowed to believe it. Okay, Halacha Beis, number 2. Kashem shebiyarnu la'el, b'chelik aleph b'chal zayin, sif Beis, just like we explained earlier, the lashon hara asur lekabel min adin afilu im siper alav b'fanav kein adin b'rechilos. Just like we said that it is forbidden to accept lashon hara even if it was said in front of the person, the actual person who is being spoken about. So too Rechilus, right? When it comes to lashon hara, and let's say you're sitting there with a friend, and there's this guy Tom, and your friend says, "Oh, you know Tom? Yeah, Tom right here, he's a thief." And even if Tom doesn't say anything, you're still not allowed to believe that lashon hara, even though it was said in front of the object. That's when it comes to lashon hara. When it comes to Rechilus, that's the same thing. Dehainu she'amar lo b'fanav ata dibarta alav kach v'kach. You and your friend are sitting, and your friend says to Tom, he says, "Hey, remember when you said that about David? You said XYZ about David." So even though he said the Rechilus in front of Tom, you're not allowed to believe it. Va'afilu im shosek ata, and even if Tom is quiet, b'shas shesipar alav ha'Rechilus b'fanav gam kein asur lekabel, you're not allowed to believe it, even though he's silent and he doesn't defend himself. Ve'ein likach mizeh shum raya shehadavar emes, you're not allowed to believe. Right, just because the fact that he was quiet, you're not allowed to take that as a proof that it's true. Va'afilu im tivo shel zeh ha'ish shelo lishtok b'shar dvarim ubezeh hu shaisek afo pikein ein zeh raya lahachlit shedavar emes u'kmo shebiyarnu hakol lamala. And just like we said earlier, even if this guy, right, Tom is a guy who's never quiet. If someone attacks him, he always defends himself and he never keeps quiet. Even if he's quiet here and doesn't say anything to defend himself, you're still not allowed to believe that it's true. Right? Maybe he has his reasons for being quiet. He thinks that there's no purpose, that it's just going to cause a fight, and he'd rather be quiet. But you're not allowed to say in your heart that just because Tom was quiet, it means it's true. Even if he doesn't actually violate the prohibition of being a talebearer, could go and like what? Let's say he's not just trying to tell you Rechilus, but you're allowed to tell someone Rechilus when it's beneficial for the future. So let's say he's saying, Tom here wants to damage you in the future. He wants to hurt you in the future. So that's not Rechilus because he's allowed to tell you. But still, even though he said it in front of Tom, you're not allowed to believe it's true. You're only allowed to protect yourself, but you're not allowed to believe in your heart that it's true. Like we'll explain later. And all the more so if he actually speaks Rechilus or lashon hara that is forbidden. Hello, kvar berarnu la'el b'shem poskim. We already said earlier in the name of the poskim, the lashon hara rechilus asur ben b'fanav ben shelo b'fanav. That lashon hara and rechilus is forbidden whether it's spoken in front of the person or not in front of the person. But filu al davar emes, even if it's true, right? We often forget that the prohibition of lashon hara, of evil speech and rechilus, is the prohibition applies even if what was said is true, right? It's not when it was false. If you lie about something bad somebody did, or some rechilus that he said, or speak rechilus in that way, that's much a graver sin, motzi shemra. But even when you say something that's true, if it's negative, that's lashon hara or rechilus. Vim kain, afilu ima kol emes kedvarav. Even if the person speaking this negative information, that everything he says is true, shadibra lov ploni kach v'kach, that Tom really said these negative things about you, afal pikain, nevertheless, hu rasha gamar, nevertheless, he's a evil person. Why? He violates the prohibition of not being a talebearer, not bearing a false report. And many other positive and negative commandments. So he says that you're all sitting around, Tom's over here, and this, or even if he's not over here, this guy tells you something that Tom said about you. Even if everything that he said, he relayed that Tom said is accurate, Tom did say those things, that's still prohibited because of Rechilus. So this person who said that information to you, he violated negative prohibitions in the Torah, many negative prohibitions. So he has the status of a rasha, of a wicked person, because he violated all those prohibitions in the Torah, even though the story is true. V'im kain, mipnei rasha zeh notzi leidach mecheskes kashruso v'lomer she'avar al iser lashon hara ki yotzivo. Now, because this person who's a rasha told you this information, you're going to have a negative view of Tom. B'vadei achashad alav d'rechilus v'lashon hara achashad gamkin l'shakar l'hosed dvar melahachlif mesofu l'tchilaso. He says that this person came to you and said negative information, and even if it seems to be true, nevertheless, he's a rasha, he's an evil person for speaking Rechilus. So if he's an evil person and willing to violate the prohibition of Rechilus and Lashon Hara, for sure he exaggerated a little the story, or he lied, because people who are going to violate the prohibitions in the Torah, for sure they're going to exaggerate, they're going to lie, or they're going to flip the order of the story, they're going to make it sound different than it was. So even if it seems that what this fellow is telling you that Tom did to you is true, nevertheless, you shouldn't believe it in your heart, because this person's a rasha, he's a wicked person for spreading rechilus, for spreading evil information to you. And since he's a wicked person, we can reasonably suspect that he exaggerated or lied or changed the story a bit, so you should therefore have reason to not believe him. But again, you're always allowed, if it's relevant to something in the future, you're allowed to protect yourself, but you just shouldn't believe it in your heart. And hope everyone has a beautiful day, and it looks like the lawnmower stopped.